Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Literature. Today we're going to concentrate on giving you a framework to answer all poetry questions, and it's the way that you can plan all of your essays and apply it to either unseen poetry or to the anthology. This session is meant to complement your lessons with your teachers and not in any way to replace them. So when we are talking about poetry, we need to talk about all the different aspects of what the poet does. And so one of the ways that you can do that is by following a really simple structure for planning all of your essays. So we're going to call this the list structure. We'll keep coming back to this because this is how we're going to look at planning all of our essays, whether it's for the anthology or for unseen. So the first thing to look at is what list stands for. So the L is for language. We'll come back and look at what each of these mean in more detail. The I is for imagery, S is for structure, and T is for theme. So if we start with language, what we are talking about here is the words that the poet uses. So we can look at word classes. So noun, verb, adjective, etc. We can look at specific interesting words. We can look at semantic fields. So that's a group of words linked by theme. So for example, if you were talking about death, it could be night, it could be darkness, it could be ending. So a group of words that has the same sort of theme to it. With imagery, we are looking at any of those techniques that a writer can use. So metaphor, simile, alliteration, personification, onomatopoeia, looking at extended metaphors here, sibilance, which is alliteration but with S's. For structure, we're looking at how something is put together. So we might be thinking about the rhyme scheme. We might be thinking about the use of punctuation. Might be thinking about who the narrator is, who the speaker is. You might look at a volta, which is a change in tone. Tense. Listing. Internal rhyme. So anything that is about how the poem is put together. And then the last one is theme. And what we are looking for in theme is the big idea. Okay. So what is it about? And that is your chance to talk about the meaning of the poem as a whole, to use a quotation that maybe you think is really interesting that you haven't used up to now in your language, imagery or structure paragraph. And therefore, if we are using this structure, we are hitting pretty much every technique that a writer uses. We're making sure that we are identifying key techniques within the poem. And we're making sure, therefore, that we can show that we understand the techniques the writer is using, and we can focus on making sure that we write about the writer and his techniques as much as we write about the meaning of the poem. So, your unseen poetry question will look something like this. You will have the copy of the poem and then you will have the question at the end. And again, we look at the question first to give us the idea of the theme of the poem. We look at the question first to try and figure out what that poem is going to be about. So if we hear in warning, how does the poet present old age? So we know that one of the key themes of this poem is old age. So when we read it, we are going to be looking for that as a key idea. We also know that we need to look at who is talking, what is the tone, what is happening. So, when I am an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me. We know already that we are talking about someone who is a woman. She is directly addressing someone else, and she is not yet old, because the poem starts with, when I am an old woman. The fact that the poem is called Warning suggests that there might be a serious element to the poem, but when she goes on to say, I shall wear purple with a red hat that doesn't go, there is a sort of playful tone to it. There is something not serious. The fact that some of the first imagery is around colour suggests that there is something fun and colourful about this poem. So who is talking? A woman who is not yet old. What is the tone? At this point, maybe a little playful. What is happening? She is telling us what she is going to do when she is an old woman. I shall spend my pension on brandy and summer gloves and satin sandals and say we've no money for butter. I shall sit down on the pavement when I'm tired and gobble up samples in shops and press alarm bells and run my stick along the public railings and make up for the sobriety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit. You can wear terrible shirts and grow more fat and eat 3 pounds of sausages at a go, or only bread and pickle for a week, and hoard pens and pencils and beer mats and things in boxes. But now we must have clothes that keep us dry and pay our rent, and not swear in the street, and set a good example for the children. We must have friends to dinner and read the papers. But maybe I ought to practice a little now, so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when suddenly I am old and start to wear purple. So what we get throughout the poem is a list of things she's going to do when she's old, as if she is, again, rebelling against what is expected of her now. The first 2 stanzas are essentially a list of what she's going to do. Then here, there is that change in tone, and she talks about what is expected of her now. And then she returns to preparing for old age. So we've read that poem really quickly. It's taken us about 2 minutes. Now what we need to do is unpick it in terms of list. So if we are looking for language, we are looking for types of words. We can see that she uses the word I throughout the poem. So that personal pronoun shows us that this is about her. Possibly that in her old age she wants to be selfish, because the verse that is about what is expected of her contains we, us, our. So she wants to be selfish because her life now is about other people. If we look at imagery, actually, whilst we have a list of things she wants to do, we We don't have a lot of metaphors within the poem, but the one that sticks out is here, the sobriety of her youth. Sobriety is a word that means soberness or not being drunk, but in this instance, she is talking about how sensible she has been. And she is comparing being sober with being sensible. Structurally, we talked about that shift in tone from the list of what she wants to do to what is expected of her. So we would talk about the Volta, but now, and how that changes the tone of the poem. But essentially, the big idea of this is that in her old age, she wants to return to her youth. And therefore we can talk about the title of the poem as a metaphor. And we can talk about how she is going to reject or ignore expectations. So that's taken us a little under 10 minutes to unpick that, and essentially what you have here is an essay plan. And you can then write each of those paragraphs which will answer that question, and you can ensure that you are touching on all of the things that the poet does. What I want you to do is practice this as a technique. Now, you will either be studying the Power and Conflict anthology or the Love and Relationships anthology. So using one of the poems from there, either Ozymandias if you do Power and Conflict, or Climbing My Grandfather if you do Love and Relationships, write out list and then find and annotate a quotation for each of them: language, imagery, structure and theme, using Ozymandias or Climbing My Grandfather. Once you have done that, if you want to practice writing that essay and looking at how that structure works for you, you can then hand that into your teacher to be marked.